So what if I told you that courage isn't some kind of magical trait you're either born with or you're not? What if it's actually a skill, something you can build and strengthen right inside your own brain? Well, today we're going to pop the hood on the neuroscience of bravery. We're going to find out exactly how to train our minds to face down fear and, take that leap.
Let's just start right there with that huge question. We all have this image in our heads of what a courageous person looks like, right? Fearless, maybe a little stoic, totally unwavering. But what if that whole picture, what if it's completely wrong?
The single biggest myth about courage is that it's the absence of fear. But the reality, it's the complete opposite. See, courage can't even exist without fear. Courage is the decision to move forward, to act, precisely when every fiber of your being is screaming at you about the risk and the uncertainty. It's action in spite of fear. And what's really cool is that the word's origin totally backs this up. Courage comes from the old Latin word cor, which literally means heart. So it was never about some cold logical calculation or a lack of feeling. It's always been about this deep, heartfelt drive that just says, I have to do this.
Okay, so here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we're gonna really lock in our new definition of courage. Then, we'll get into the science and find the literal switch in your brain that controls it. We'll look at the two paths that switch can take, learn how to actually build up our bravery, and finally, we'll see why taking that one leap can literally change everything.
All right, let's jump right into our first section, redefining courage. And it's funny, the original Arabic root of the word meant something like to jump over, like jumping over a chasm. So from the very beginning, it's all been about this idea of a leap. And that metaphor is just perfect, isn't it? Courage isn't for the everyday stuff, the paths you can just stroll down without a thought. No, it's for those moments when you're facing a gap, a real obstacle that you can't just go around. You have to make a conscious, heartfelt decision to leap over to the other side.
Okay, let's get into the neuroscience, because this is where it gets really, really cool. Thanks to amazing researchers like Andrew Huberman over at Stanford, we now know there's a physical, trainable circuit for courage right inside our brains. And it all kicks off right here, in a part of the brain called the thalamus. The best way to think about this thing is like its grand central station for your brain. All the sensory info, everything you see, hear, feel, it all arrives here first. And the thalamus acts like the traffic controller, deciding where to send that signal next.
So, picture this. A challenge pops up. Maybe you have to give a big presentation or have a really difficult conversation. That sensory information, the sight of the audience, the feeling in your stomach, it all hits your thalamus. And then, in a fraction of a second, a choice is made. A switch gets flipped.
And that brings us to the million-dollar question, right? Where does the signal go next? Because where the thalamus sends that signal, well, that determines everything. It's the fork in the road between freezing up and stepping forward.
And here are the two roads your brain can take. Path 1, the signal shoots over to the amygdala. That's your brain's ancient alarm system, the stress and fear center. The result? That classic fight, flight, or freeze response. The outcome is almost always avoidance. But path 2, the signal gets routed to your prefrontal cortex. That's the CEO of your brain, the home of planning and deliberate action. And the outcome there? Engagement and progress.
This right here, this is the voice of that amygdala pathway. We've all heard it, right? It's that what-if voice. It scans for every single thing that could possibly go wrong and decides that, you know what? Staying put is definitely the safest option.
And then there's this. This is the voice of the prefrontal cortex. And notice the huge difference. It doesn't pretend the fear isn't there. It says, okay, this is scary. But then it immediately connects the action to a deeper purpose, to something that matters. It's the voice that chooses the leap, not because it's risk-free, but because the reason for jumping is just that important.
So this is the most important part. How do we get our brain to choose that action pathway more often? This brings us to the most practical and honestly the most hopeful part of this whole thing, how you can literally, physically build bravery. And the answer is this incredible concept called neuroplasticity. The bottom line is your brain is not fixed. It's more like a muscle. The neural pathways you use the most get stronger, faster, more automatic. So every time you avoid something because you're scared, you're strengthening that fear pathway. But every single time you act despite the fear, you're strengthening the courage circuit.
So think of this as your courage workout plan. You don't start by trying to deadlift 500 pounds, right? You start small, take tiny, manageable risks. The absolute key is consistency. Every time you choose to act when you feel uncomfortable, you are literally rewiring your brain. You're building this positive feedback loop that makes courage the easier, more automatic choice the next time around. Okay, let's bring it all home with our final section. Because this isn't just about small habits. It's about how these small actions build up and lead to a fundamental transformation in who you are. And we come right back to that central idea of the leap. Every time you choose action over avoidance, you are taking a leap. And here's the most powerful part. The person who lands on the other side is not the same person who took off. You've proven something to yourself. You've expanded your own idea of what's possible for you.
And this is the ultimate takeaway, really. That one decision to leap. It changes your entire trajectory. Because you've done something you once thought was beyond you, life can never quite shrink back to what it was before. You carry that new knowledge, that new version of yourself forward forever.
So as we close out, the question really isn't whether or not you have courage. You do. The wiring is already there waiting. The only real question is, what small, consistent steps will you take to strengthen it? Your courage circuit is waiting for you. What leap are you going to train for?